And we're going to have a big debate tonight about this civil war that has been going on in the Reform Party. I know quite a lot of you are feeling, quite sad at the moment, regardless of whose side you're on, to see this party that so many of you have put your support behind, taken the risk, abandoned the uni party and gone for, and now seeing it just feels like it's all falling apart, or at least it does to a lot of you. But, there's a lot of disagreement between people about who is in the right here. We had this statement come out, which we'll have a quick read through in a moment, signed by Lee Anderson and Zia Youssef. Rupert Lowe, is talk of various allegations of bullying and potentially threats of violence as well. But everyone thought this was quite suspicious, given this came out the day after Rupert Lowe had essentially questioned Nigel's leadership and said that some things needed to change in the party. So get your comments coming in, guys, because we'll definitely be interacting with you guys. So let us know, are you team Nigel, are you team Rupert, and who's responsible for this as well? We had Lee Anderson and Zia Youssef sign that letter, but then it seemed as though more people were pointing the finger at Zia than Lee, at least from what I saw. We had Ben Habib go on GB News, I think it was, and say Zia Youssef is the problem, Zia Youssef needs to be fired. But Nigel was initially being quite quiet, but then Nigel started tuning in. He's been doing some media rounds and writing various columns, getting involved and saying that he supports the decision and thinks that they did the right thing. So now eyes are very much on Nigel. So there is a question of who was the biggest, instigator here in kicking Rupert out of the party. But anyway, let's crack on and get into it. So let's just have a quick refresh ourselves of what was said in this statement. So this statement went out on Friday afternoon, where we see it's with regret that we feel obligated to disclose that the party received complaints with 2 female employees about serious bullying in the offices of the Member of Parliament for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe. One worked in his parliamentary office, the other in his constituency office. We understand complaints have been made to parliamentary authorities. Evidence was provided to us of workplace bullying, the targeting of female staff who raised concerns, and evidence of derogatory and discriminatory remarks made about women, including reference to a perceived disability. We feel we have a duty of care to all our staff, whether employed directly or indirectly. Accordingly, we appointed an independent King's Counsel to conduct an investigation into the veracity of these comments. To date, Mr. Lowe has yet to cooperate with this investigation. In addition to these allegations of a disturbing pattern of behaviour, Mr. Lowe has on at least 2 occasions made threats of physical violence against our party chairman. Accordingly, this matter is with the police. Quite a strong claim to make against Rupert there. Reform stands for the highest standards of conduct in public life, and we will apply these standards without fear nor favour, including within our own party. And as I said, that was signed by Lee Anderson, who is the chief whip, and Zia Youssef, who is the chairman of the party. So that statement came out, and very quickly Rupert denied the allegations here. He also denies that he was not cooperating with some sort of investigation. He claims he's spoken to the KC, who says that an investigation hasn't even started yet, and that Rupert hasn't received any requests for information. It's not like he's not cooperating, but that's what he says. And we're also hearing that apparently these complaints of bullying were, or at least Rupert claims they were complaints about bullying that weren't actually about him. It talks about the office of Rupert Lowe against other individuals apparently, and apparently he claims it's a vexatious bullying complaint because the individuals involved making these allegations were people who themselves had been in trouble for wrongdoing, not sure exactly what. But that's the context, and there are a lot of tweets from Rupert sort of going in detail through this statement and giving the full explanation of why he thinks he's in the right. We won't go through all of that because I'm sure you guys will have seen it all. But when we've got some other stuff to look at. But just, first thoughts. I mean, Connie, what did you think when you saw that statement put out?
Well, when I was actually at a pub when I first saw it, and I was just like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is the honeymoon phase is over. This is exactly the sort of thing that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch were waiting to happen. I'm very interested. Obviously, they've both stayed quiet on it, as far as I'm aware. They haven't, if they have been asked, they haven't commented. I don't really know what to think of it, because we clearly don't know the entire story. But I just can't believe something like this is happening so publicly, because awful things happen all the time within parties, but they seem to be able to keep. And I don't know if it's this new thing of Reform, basically more than any other party, operating online, and that's where they get all of their views, whether it's young people on TikTok or older people on X. I just don't understand why any of this is, even if Nigel would be accused of covering up bullying for not exposing the fact that this was going on, how is this the best way to go about it? And I can't see how it doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. I don't really see how it's ever going to be able to be resolved, to be honest.
Nicholas, I can't remember if I actually introduced you guys at the start of the podcast. We've got Nicholas Lissack here and Connie Shaw. Now, Nicholas, I know you're more on the more pro-Nigel side of this, which we'll, of course, get into. But just, even if the allegations about Rupert are true, do you agree with Connie that this doesn't seem like the right way to go about these kind of complaints?
No, I actually completely disagree with Connie. I think it's very important that the party has maintained complete transparency on issues like this, considering how the press are so determined to attack Reform. Imagine what they would say if they got their hands on reports that bullying were going on in Reform MP's office and the party did nothing. This is extremely important that the party is taking these steps to ensure that people in the offices are being protected, and moreover, that the chairman of the party feels safe. This shouldn't be an issue, though unfortunately this has been simmering under the table for quite a long time. And was I necessarily surprised by the statement? No, I wasn't in the slightest. But am I really worried? No, not particularly, as Rupert is primarily relevant on Twitter. In fact, a recent poll conducted actually only 2 days ago showed that 86% of the public didn't know who Rupert Lowe was, and that included 71% of Reform voters, who, when they were shown a photo of Rupert, actually thought, in fact, 3% of these people actually thought that when they were shown a photo of Rupert, that he was the late Sir David Amess. So, in my view, this is primarily happening on Twitter, because that is Rupert's soapbox. Rupert has 300,000 followers on Twitter. He's very popular on there, but Twitter really isn't real life. So, you know what? I'm not particularly worried, and Reform has an obligation to investigate these complaints. And, as we can see, this is the protocol that would be followed in any other political party of the day, any other serious political party. And that's what Reform is. We're not a pressure group. We're a serious political party. We're a government in waiting, and we have an obligation to investigate these allegations.
I don't see how you can say that this is what a serious party would be doing, when it's like the back. I suppose you're on Nigel's side here, and it's Rupert who's doing the back and forth. But if you've been accused of doing some really serious things, he's going to want to try and cover his back. So clearly something has happened. Clearly they're not on the same page. But how can you say that this is about transparency when Reform is not really known for its transparency? But now all of a sudden this is being transparent, but it's impossibly the worst way that they could go about it. Like, how? I don't. You hear what do you think when you hear about lots of people saying that they're going to leave the party, and that there were people who were going to stand in the council elections, and now they're not doing so because of this?
I don't necessarily buy that. For example, I know personally 11 people on Twitter who I'm very close with, who have rather large followings, who have all posted that they are, quote unquote, leaving Reform. They're cancelling their membership of the party. Well, I know, for example, that all 11 of them aren't actually party members. They were there for Rupert. These people they accuse Farage of having a cult of personality. They themselves have forged one around Rupert Lowe. And Reform have been remarkably transparent in the past, remarkably transparent. Going back to the Richard Tice days, the party has effectively been an open book. So I think to claim that really, really, really is a misreading of the situation. And so, look, Whether or whether not the party officials should be engaging with Rupert in this back and forth on Twitter, I quite frankly disagree. I think Rupert thrives on that because this is going very well for him in terms of Twitter engagement. He has had millions upon millions upon millions of impressions. He's gained 30,000 followers in about a week. But ultimately, I think the party has a responsibility to investigate these accusations, and it is being done in a professional way behind the scenes. Unfortunately, however, because Rupert has this soapbox, he feels the need to try and drag the party down with him. But overall, I would say that the conduct of party leadership has been exactly what you would expect. Nigel Farage is the leader of Reform. There is no one else who can fill his shoes, and that's my thoughts.
I'm just thinking, if you're a member of the public who was feeling a bit politically homeless for a while. I very much felt that way. I felt as though, there's no way I'm ever going to be a Labour supporter. I'm not a socialist. I don't support their policies. But the Tory party is just full of infighting that never ever seems to stop. Nothing ever seems to get done because there's constantly another leadership election, more stabbing in the back, very toxic, all this drama, all this gossip, right? And a lot of people who were frustrated about that toxicity in the Tory party decided to give the Reform Party a chance and decided this is the party of integrity. I mean, do you not think, Nicholas, that regardless of whether you think these allegations are true or not, that it does come across as, toxic, stabbing in the back, party drama, lack of unity, a little bit like the Tory party?
Well, let's talk about stabbing one in the back, because there is a long-forgotten thing that happened back in 2019 that nobody is seemingly willing to dredge up, and that was Rupert Lowe and Dudley North. 30 minutes, he was the prospective parliamentary candidate in Dudley North for the Brexit Party at the 2019 general election. 30 minutes before forms were submitted, he withdrew. He withdrew his candidacy, which did not enable Reform to field another candidate in the constituency, which ultimately proved, Rupert effectively sold out the people of Dudley North who were waiting and excited to vote for the Brexit Party. And you know why he did that? Because in the weeks leading up to that decision, he had been meeting with a senior official from Number 10, somebody in Boris Johnson's inner circle, and yet he acquiesced to the Tories. So you want to talk about backstabbing? Let's talk about Rupert Lowe and Dudley North. However, I will say this. Reform is remarkably united behind the scenes. As somebody who is, in the party itself, I know a lot of people, and there is a tremendous amount of enthusiasm behind the scenes, a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. So to have this derail everything, in my mind, look, people on Twitter are going to be angry. Of course, that's the purpose of Twitter. It's a constant negative feedback loop, and it is not entirely reflective of society. As I pointed out earlier, not that many people know who Rupert Lowe actually is. When people think of Reform, they think of Nigel Farage. And so, I understand why some people may be a bit put off by this, but ultimately, in my view, this is a bit of a storm in a teacup. And, in 4 years' time, this is not going to be relevant.
Yeah, and you make the good point that of that poll that we had about how many members of the public actually recognise Rupert Lowe, and only I think 71% of Reform supporters recognise Rupert Lowe. I think there's absolutely no doubt that Nigel Farage himself as an individual has been responsible for getting the party as popular as it is today. They would not have done anywhere near as well in the general election if it weren't for Nigel. And there are a lot of people who are pissed off at Nigel because of what has happened. But ultimately, because you've got some people saying, oh, we should have Rupert Lowe as leader instead. Would Rupert Lowe have the ability to be, kind of like a Boris figure in the way that Nigel is? I'm not saying that Nigel and Boris Johnson are the same, but they share one thing in common, which is charisma that wins votes. So, I think ultimately, is this going to be the end of the Reform Party? I don't think so. And does it make sense for Rupert Lowe to create a new party? We've had people saying, oh, Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib, they should start another party. I feel like we do not need yet another party. I'm fed up of seeing UKIP saying that we should we should revive that party and start that again. Like, Reform has got to an amazing place as a brand new party. It may suffer a little bit as a consequence of this, and I personally feel very sorry for Rupert Lowe in what has happened to him, because I do think that this is at least in part politically motivated, and I don't think it's been dealt with well personally. But will I abandon the Reform Party and go and vote for UKIP, or vote for the Tories, or vote for some tiny little party that Rupert Lowe decides to create after this with Ben Habib, if that is something he ever decided to do? No, I'm not. So I think realistically it may not really hurt their support in the long run that much. I mean, Connie, do you think this is going to be a killer for because a lot of people are saying the Reform Party is dead now?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask Nicholas 2 questions. Firstly, you talk about things that have happened in the past with Rupert Lowe before this. Have you always thought that he was basically a wrong-un? Because that's the impression I'm getting from how you're speaking about him. And secondly, do you not think it's quite a poor argument that, this won't ruin Reform because no one in the general public really knows who he is? Does that mean that Reform only really value their MPs who are public figures, who the public know, like Nigel? But do you not think that Rupert Lowe has been absolutely integral to the parliamentary party and his activity in Parliament compared to any other MP? Because I think that's quite a damning reflection on how if you are reflective of what Reform members and the side of the party who are supporting Nigel in this case, that the only reason that the positive is that, at least people don't know who he is. That shows me that you or other members don't particularly value Rupert's work in Parliament.
Well, firstly, that's simply a statement of fact. The fact that only 14% of Brits could identify who Rupert Lowe was after seeing a picture, that is not reflective of what the party thinks. That is simply a statement of fact. So please, Connie, do not confuse the two.
But you're using an argument as a sort of, it's okay.
Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Do not confuse the two. Please let me finish, okay? Okay, also, firstly, Rupert takes immense pride in the fact that he has submitted so many written questions. He doesn't submit the written questions, staffers do. And also, Rupert hasn't even tweeted anything, ever. It's a staffer that runs his account. So, this whole narrative...
And how do you know that?
Come on. I'm in the Reform. Everybody uses that. I know the guy. I know the guy who tweets on Lowe's behalf. Nice guy, very intelligent, about my age. But Lowe's account is run by a third party. So effectively, all of his political ideology is pretty much built around sort of the Zoomer interpretation of where politics is going. And that is hard right. Lowe has effectively ingratiated himself on Twitter like that. But, the point I'm making here is, yes, of course, many people in the party value Lowe's work. But you know what we also value? We also value people being team players, people not challenging our leader publicly, undermining confidence in Farage, which is what the Uniparty wants. I find it awfully convenient. Now, I'm not saying anything, though. I do find it a rather big coincidence how on 2 separate occasions, just before Lowe screws over the party, he has met with Tory officials. Because, of course, Lowe was allegedly photographed with Liz Truss at a brasserie last week, very shortly before the article in the Daily Mail came out. I'm not saying there's any sort of conspiracy. I'm not like that, though. I will say this. I don't think Lowe is as innocent as he's coming across as. Farage is the public face of Reform. Let's not make two ways about this. When people hear Nigel Farage's name, they know who he is. You go to the pub, you talk about Nigel Farage, you ask people, stick your hand up. Do you know who Nigel Farage is? People know who he is. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get somebody raising their hand. But the point I'm primarily making here is because we have many, many, many truly brilliant MPs, including one who, might I add, doesn't get enough attention. That is James McMurdoch. He is doing a sensational job, a really sensational job. But you know what? We need people who are team players, and unfortunately, Lowe has not been a team player. And I know that he has been approached by numerous people behind the scenes and asked, hey, come on, be a team player. And, he seemed determined to go the way he has gone. And so that's why I wasn't particularly surprised by what had happened. But, I do very, very, very much value the other MPs in Reform. I think I've made that abundantly clear on my Twitter. Every 30 seconds I'm putting out other stuff praising even the smallest of their actions. And I think to claim that Reform is simply a one-man show is wrong. But the thing is, we need team players. We definitely need team players, because you know what? We are not going to defeat Labour if we are constantly bickering and fighting behind the scenes. And the truth is, this is not the end of Reform. This is a minor road bump, and the party will continue to thrive and do spectacularly well. And I still think we're on track to win the 2029 general election, because if you look at recent polling, Reform has not gone down at all. This has not had any impact at all on Reform's polling, because the vast majority of people simply want change. They don't really care about the internal squabbling, even though that is important to maintaining party equilibrium. But the vast majority of Brits are fed up with Labour, they're fed up with the Tories, and they're going to vote for Reform in 2029, irrespective of what happens.
Now, just going back to, just 1 second, Connie. Just, Nicholas, just going back to what you're saying there about we need team players. Now, I understand the argument that you don't want everyone in your party to be completely divided and at loggerheads and fighting all the time. I personally do think that it is normal and a good thing to have a bit of disagreement in the party, and to be able to, as a leader, be willing to listen to some constructive criticism. But regardless, right, as what you're saying there about him not being a team player sounds very similar to me to what I saw in Nigel Farage's Telegraph column over the weekend, what we saw when we had Richard Tice speaking to Camilla Tominey on GB News on Sunday morning, suggesting he will not be let back in the party regardless of whether he is found not guilty, because he's not a team player, essentially. Are you basically admitting, by talking about whether he's a team player, that this disposal was political? This was not simply about allegations against Rupert?
No, this disposal is certainly not political, but I think it's very important that the viewers at home actually have context. The garden was not certainly rosy before this happened. However, considering the allegations levied against Rupert, Reform has a duty of care. We have a responsibility to the public to maintain transparency, to briefly suspend the whip, to investigate one of our MPs. And the KC who's been assigned to that is doing an absolutely spectacular job, from what I hear. And, it is extremely, extremely, extremely important the public knows the truth. I understand people are very angry and quite shocked at the moment, but believe me, this storm will fizzle out and everything will be absolutely wonderful again. And look, I'm not saying Rupert shouldn't be let back into the party. I like it. Don't get me wrong. I quite like what he posts on Twitter. I quite like it, but at the same time, Reform has an obligation to investigate these allegations. Imagine if, for example, say the Labour Party received an accusation about bullying in one of their parliamentary offices, and a Labour MP threatening the chairman of the Labour Party on multiple occasions, and they didn't do anything. You know what we would say? We would crucify them, and that's what they would do to us if we didn't do anything. So quite frankly, we have a moral obligation to take the correct procedures and to actually investigate Rupert Lowe for his behaviour. And, look, I've been relatively critical of him tonight, but I want to make the point abundantly clear that if he is found to be innocent, I don't see any reason as to why he can't come back to Reform. But of course, that is a big if. I mean, we don't have all the facts yet. The investigation is still ongoing. And Rupert has really, really, really done a number on the party on Twitter, which of course isn't particularly helpful if he wants to come back and be buddies with Farage and Tice and everyone else again. But on a fundamental note, we have an obligation to investigate. And I'm simply saying we as the party, not me. I don't work for the party. I'm simply a supporter.